Good morning, and thank you for tuning in to part one of our event series, Homeownership in America, Prioritizing Attainability in 2021. My name is Jim Saxa, and I'm a features reporter for CQ Roll Call. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, the Manufactured Housing Institute, for making today's event possible. I'm joined by their CEO, Leslie Gooch.
Thanks so much, Jim, and welcome everyone to part one of our virtual series about attainable homeownership in America. As Jim mentioned, I'm Leslie Gooch, the CEO of the Manufactured Housing Institute. This is such an important conversation for our country right now. Housing affordability was on the forefront of policy discussions in 2019, and now the COVID pandemic has made it even more of an issue, with Congress focusing not only on home and housing, but also on racial equity and social justice. Now is the time to have this important conversation. As part of the discussion about the government's role in housing affordability, we need to talk about the production of housing that is naturally affordable without subsidy. So let me tell you a little bit about MHI. We're the only national trade association that represents all segments of the factory-built housing industry. Our members include home builders, suppliers, retail sellers, lenders, installers, community owners and operators, and others who serve the industry. In 2020, the industry shipped almost 95,000 HUD code manufactured homes produced by 34 U.S. corporations in 135 plants located across the country. Our members are responsible for close to 85% of the manufactured homes produced each year, and we're 10% of all new single-family homes. Manufactured housing is the only form of housing regulated by a federal building code. Unlike site-built homes, which are subject to a variety of different state and local regulations, manufactured homes are built to one uniform federal code, the Manufactured Housing Construction and Safety Standards Act, which we like to refer to as the HUD code. Manufactured housing offers value to consumers because of the technological advancements and cost savings that are associated with the factory-built process, and because of the efficiencies that come with a federal building code. Today, manufacturers deliver high-quality HUD code homes with designs and features that consumers want at a lower price point than site-built homes, all without government subsidy. The average cost of a new manufactured home without land is $81,900, and this is compared to the average cost of a new site-built home, which is close to $300,000 without land. We are the main source of unsubsidized affordable housing in the United States, and we are a critical homeownership option, commonly more affordable than rental housing, and there are currently 22 million people in the country that live in manufactured housing. Importantly, data shows that our residents love living in their homes. We conducted as MHI a national research survey that indicated that 2/3 of manufactured housing residents are satisfied with their homes and likely to recommend living in a manufactured home to others. Further, residents cited affordability and the ability to own their home as the top reasons for selecting our housing. As the nation continues to navigate the affordable housing shortage, which has been exacerbated by the COVID pandemic, the demand for increasing the affordable housing supply in this country has never been greater. With the President and Congress seeking to expand the American dream of homeownership and promote fair housing opportunities for all, manufactured housing is a path to addressing the shortage of affordable housing in this country. So I really appreciate CQ Roll Call for putting this series together. I look forward throughout the series to hearing from policymakers, regulators, and the private sector about how we can work together to bridge the gap between housing supply and demand and provide a path forward for the next generation of prospective homebuyers. Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Leslie. Kicking off this event series is Congressman Steve Stivers, who represents Ohio's 15th Congressional District. Congressman Stivers is serving his fourth term on the House Financial Services Committee, which oversees the Federal Reserve, FDIC, and HUD. Hello, Congressman. We are thrilled you can join us today for this important discussion.
Well, I appreciate it. Housing's important, and it's I'm the ranking member of the Housing and Insurance Subcommittee on Financial Services, so I'm excited to have this discussion. And I think, it's an issue that's important to me, but it's important to a lot of people, both in urban and rural settings. So it's important to people all around this country.
Absolutely. And let's get started. So, what we're talking about is affordable housing. That's what this event series assumes, that there is a crisis, an affordable housing crisis. But let's be explicit. Do you think that there is?
I do. In fact, in my home area, in and around Columbus, Ohio, we have a shortage of approximately 50,000 affordable housing units for people that work in factories, for people that work in warehouses, for policemen, for firemen, for teachers that have middle-class jobs. So that's where the real housing shortage is. In the upper end of the market, where people are paying $1 million a house, you can find a lot of houses. But in the affordable housing category that a working family can afford the mortgage for, there's 50,000 shortage of units in and around Franklin County, Ohio, where I'm from.
Yeah, and that's a lot. What do you think is the cause?
Well, I think it's multifaceted, and I think part of it is our building codes and some of our regulations at the federal level make building more expensive. Obviously, we've seen a big run up in some of the components. I had a big conference call with an affordable builder recently that told me that they're seeing a huge increase in the cost of lumber in every unit right now, because lumber as a commodity had a giant increase in price. And so there are some commodity issues there. And I think the real issue we have to figure out is how to make affordable housing something that can be done in the free market, not just through LIHTC credits and affordable housing programs at the government-sponsored enterprise, but actually make it something that the regulations and building codes allow to happen inside the free market. And so we need innovation. We need things like tiny homes. We need things like manufactured housing. We need things like some of the new building materials that allow to make stick homes or regular constructed homes to be constructed cheaper. So it's really about innovation in the building codes, innovation in materials. And I think if we can put those two things together, we can bring the free market solutions that will ultimately make up this number, because the government programs aren't going to make up 50,000 units in my home county.
Yeah, and we'll talk about government programs in a bit.
And government plays a role.
Yeah,
it's not. We're not going to be able to drive the whole thing. And last year, Lacey Clay and I did something that encouraged small dollar mortgages too, which was something that was really hard to get in the marketplace. And now that has passed, and those are more accessible. And that was a piece of the problem as well. But I think now it's about helping the builders in the free market be able to innovate and make housing more affordable.
Right. And one of the things that I know you've spoken about and a lot of Republicans have spoken about is you just mentioned, regulations. Now, you said federal regulations, but I believe
mostly local building codes, but some of the
exactly.
There are some regulations at Housing and Urban Development and some regulations through the GSEs that make building more expensive as well. So there are some federal regulations, but most of it is the local building codes.
Right. So most of it is local building codes, and you are a federal lawmaker. So, historically, the Republican Party has had two sort of like philosophies to it. And one is that local control is best, and another is that, less government in general and less federal government is best. Here, they're sort of pitted against each other. Do you think that there is a role for the federal government to encourage states and localities to loosen some of their zoning regulations and other land use regulations that some economists say drive up?
I would do it not through federalizing those issues, but encouraging those issues through things like the community block grant funding formulas. So if you have modern and adaptable building codes that allow for affordable housing, you get those communities get plussed up in the CDBG formula. And so they all of a sudden there's a financial incentive for them to look at that. So it's not that I want to take that over, do it at the federal level, but the federal government is such a big funder of our state and local governments through CDBG. And it's the same thing that the federal government did with highway funds with regard to the drinking age in the 80s. And I remember some states said, no, we won't do it. But guess what? All 50 states finally said, oh, we're going to follow the money and raise our drinking age to 21. So right. I think there's things we can do with funding formulas with community development block grants that will encourage those local building codes to change without mandating it or federalizing those issues.
I mean, personally, I don't think it would be constitutional if you guys mandated it, but using your tax and spend powers, I think Congress could encourage. And it seems like that's one of the few areas where there is some agreement between the progressives and more conservatives. What I'm wondering is what's being discussed in Congress this year on this issue. Like we said, there is some overlap between the parties, which is kind of rare these days. What sort of bills are you working on, or is the committee working on that you think might really address this issue?
Well, I think, I think there's a way to work on that very issue with community development block grants. I've talked to Chairman Cleaver. I don't want to claim that we are in unanimous agreement for everything in that, but there is there's a lot of opportunity there. And then last year we did pass something called the Yes in My Backyard Act that actually took steps that encourage local governments to adopt these inclusionary zoning laws. And so it's a good start, but I think there's more we can do there. And I think there's more we can do through making some of our HUD programs more flexible and adaptable to encourage private capital to come in and build affordable housing through rental units.
Gotcha. So we've been talking a lot about getting rid of government regulations that you feel, I think is a fair way of putting it, are distorting the market in a way that is leading to the shortage of housing. I think a lot of Democrats would say that this is really just more of a market failure. It's not government's fault at any level. And so what they are proposing, is really big investments in public housing. The chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, Maxine Waters, has a $100 billion proposal and a few other similar and related proposals. What I'm wondering is there any room for some sort of compromise between her big spending, government is the solution, and your more let's get local government out of the way to allow the industry to start to address this issue?
Well, I think there might be room for compromise, and I'm willing to compromise if we can truly compromise and come together, because clearly our housing authorities around this country are one way to address affordable housing, but I will say that I prefer a more flexible position for them as well, like the Moving to Work program that puts wraparound services with those tenants to make sure that they get training, job training, they get soft skills and hard skills that can then help them go out and get a job, so that their public housing is not a permanent situation, but a temporary situation. So if we would move toward a more holistic model, both in homelessness and in our housing authorities, people follow a housing first model, but it has become a housing only model. So they don't get the additional services to a lot of those residents that allow them to graduate out of public housing. And I think that should also be part of our goal. Public housing is great as a temporary position, but it shouldn't be something that people are subjugated to forever because they can't get a job or don't have the skills. So I think if we can come together on wraparound services that help people, some people graduate out of public housing, that would, I think, be a very positive thing. And, I'm not against public housing. I'm a co-chair of the Public Housing Caucus. So, I mean, it is an important thing that has helped millions of Americans over time. In fact, I believe Chairman Cleaver said at one of the hearings he grew up in public housing for part of his life. So it's, and he's done pretty well for himself. But I want to see people graduate out of public housing and become a member of Congress or become a journalist or become something that is a sustaining career that they can raise a family on.
Well, I don't know if journalism's a sustaining career these days, but
I'm not sure Congress is either.
So you mentioned, a couple bills that you worked on last year that passed the House. Remind me, did they get attached to anything in the Senate, make it through?
So the Small Dollar Lending Act did make it through, which is great, and that's a start. But the other thing I'd like to see us do is look at housing because we have home ownership rates that are much higher among the white population than the minority population. And I'm working with Chairman Cleaver to address some of those inequities. And frankly, that's driving the wealth gap between white families and minority families. And, a Duke University study said if you can bring the housing rates up, it will cut the wealth gap by 38%, which would, allow every American to live the American dream. And that's the America I'm for. And I'm willing to try to figure out how to invest in that and figure out how we can give the dream of not only home ownership, but, growing assets to every American family. And, it probably will be something that you'll have to work through. It won't just be down payment assistance, because last time we addressed the inequity in home ownership, we created subprime lending. I say I wasn't here. The Congress did that. And subprime lending was part of what drove the housing crisis in 2007, 2008, 2009. So in solving the home ownership rates, I don't want to create a new crisis. So I want to make sure we think through the unintended consequences that I don't think Congress did very well last time they tried to address this issue.
Yeah. And how often are you talking to your Democratic colleagues on this? Is this one of the areas where the bipartisanship that we're seeing very often on the floor is not infecting the debate yet? Or
well, right now we are still talking a lot on housing issues, which is a great thing. And I think the good news is both sides recognize the housing, and as I quantified 50,000 units in my home area, but it's like that in rural communities across this country, suburban communities, and urban communities. So it is an issue that every one of the 435 members of Congress is dealing with in a smaller or larger way, depending on their local community and whether it's growing or how much it's growing. I happen to live in a growing community that is seeing a net in-migration of people and has a lot of jobs. So we are feeling that pressure more than some other communities. But even if you're 1,000 units short in a smaller community, that's a giant number.
Yeah. President Biden has signaled that he wants infrastructure to be another big package. It could be something that goes through the reconciliation process that makes it easier to pass bills out of the Senate. And as part of that, I know some public housing advocates have been trying to get housing included as the idea of housing as infrastructure. Are you in any conversations that you can share around this? Is that still very much just all Democrats right now?
That is very much something that Maxine Waters is focused on. She and I have had a couple discussions about it. I want to make sure that every housing authority, regardless of how they're structured and whether they do a lot of direct investment or, the Columbus Metropolitan Housing Authority is an example of a housing authority that has used Obama-era regulations to actually leverage private capital and grow their number of vouchers significantly. They announced an increase in the number of vouchers just a couple months ago in the thousands because of the way they've been able to manage their portfolio because they leverage private capital. And I think that's something that we need to have a conversation about. We had conversations, we had a hearing about that last cycle in the last Congress. I hope that we will have another conversation about it because I don't want it to just be a public spending bill that encourages those housing authorities to build publicly owned infrastructure, but allows them to also leverage that and leverage private capital that might even be more efficient. So as long as it's not a one size all that picks winners and losers in the different models of our housing authorities, then I am very open to it. The problem would be is if we were going to pick winners and losers and say that public entity has to be the developer themselves and own it themselves is the only way that works. If that's the case, then I would have deep concerns about it because I think that model has proven to have a lot of maintenance that is deferred, a maintenance backlog that's deferred, and keeps people in units that are not as up to date and not as have as many amenities as some of the units, the way the Columbus Metropolitan Housing Authority does it, where they partner with private capital.
So before
I wish I could remember what that program was called. I'm just, but it was an Obama-era regulation that allowed for that to happen, and a lot of housing authorities have done that, and it's really resulted in better housing outcomes for the tenants and nicer places. And now more units, more vouchers that are available in those communities. So as long as we don't pick one model, I'm open to the owned and operated model, but I want to make sure that we allow the partnership model as well.
All right. It'll be something to look forward to in the debates that I'm sure will be happening. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
On behalf of CQ Roll Call and MHI, thank you, Congressman Stivers, for joining us today. And thank you to everyone who tuned in, and be sure to follow @Roll Call for part 2 of this event series. I'm Jim Saxa.